Homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Everybody on this wonderful Sunday evening. We are so grateful that each and every one of you are here. If this is your first time, we want to welcome you. Thank you to all of our subs, our Patreon members, and of course our members on YouTube. We ask only one thing here on the interview room, and that is that you share this program out to every one of your social media networks, and that you like and subscribe to our channel. For that, we would be eternally grateful. As always, a big thank you to our mods, Miss Sophia, Mimi J2, Maui Girl, Teresa M, and Laura. Without you, we cannot do this show. And we would ask that if you're in the chat to please be respectful, not only to our mods, but to one another. And thank you, each and every one of you who are here this evening again. You know, I have a really good friend here, my buddy Jeff Wood, and my colleague in the Cold Case Foundation. And just when you thought you got a really cool guest, then you get to have Jeff back, and you have a really, really cool guest. Let me tell you a little bit about this guy seated next to me here on the screen. He was a special agent in the FBI for over 20 years, and he conducted complex criminal investigations targeting violent street gangs, including MS-13, and that's who we're going to talk about tonight, and many, many others. He was also part of the takedown of the Boston Marathon bombers, and if you guys missed that episode with Jeff the last time he was here, you've got to go into the playlist. It's under FBI stories, and Jeff even had the cool undercover video about that, how some of that went down. But he was intricately involved in that as a case agent. But he took down the largest MS-13 case on the East Coast. And we're going to talk about these guys tonight. He's a gang expert. He's given many expert testimonies, not only in Congress, but up in court, in federal courts, both state and federal, excuse me. As an FBI agent, Jeff was assigned to the Boston and Washington, D.C. offices, where he was the lead investigator in the Boston Marathon bombing investigation. And if that doesn't say this guy is like super, super cool, what's really great about him, he's a U.S. Army Airborne Ranger, and he's a veteran of our great military forces. He served as a rifle platoon leader and a scout sniper platoon leader. And I'll tell you what, I just love this guy. I mean, just when you thought, you hung out with really cool dudes, here comes Jeff. And so with that said, he's married, great family, stays low in this beautiful country. And I could have thought of nobody better than to call Jeff and say, hey, I think there's a problem in River City. What say you? And we want to talk tonight about the Kayla Hamilton murder, which, by the way, was approximately a year earlier than Rachel Morin, but it was only like 14 miles apart. And there had to be a correlation to this, because when the sheriff talked about Rachel's murder, he also talked about Kayla's murder. So with that introduction, Jeff, thanks for being here this evening, buddy.
Thanks. I just want to make one thing. I was the case agent in getting the person who gave the gun to the Boston Marathon bombers.
Got
I
it.
helped out during the whole when we did the whole case when it first happened. But once everything was done by the end of the week, I mean, I was in the command post all week. But once it was done, I was back to doing gang work, and then the marathon team getting ready for the trial approached me and asked me to make a case against somebody they thought could be involved, and we did. And he was the one who actually provided the gun to the bombers that was
Nice.
used in the firefight and used to murder the MIT police officer.
Yeah, and you were on the ground during all of that for sure.
Yes, yes.
Yep. And didn't you the one witness? Didn't you drive the one witness around?
The carjack victim.
Yes.
Yes, I one of the troopers who had responded first and had talked to him at great length. We then took him and had him drive us the whole way around where he got carjacked until the point where he was able to get out of the car and flee across the street to the other gas station and contact the police with 911.
Wow. Yeah. Well, needless to say, buddy, you've been there, done that. And I think you have a tremendous amount of information about the individuals we're going to talk about tonight. And just so everybody knows, Kayla was a 20-year-old autistic girl, a woman. She was 20, from Aberdeen, Maryland. She was essayed and then strangled by an admitted known MS-13 gang member from El Salvador. He was out for 6 months before they caught him. Does that sound familiar, right? With the Rachel Morin case, he was also right under everybody's nose for about 5 months when they arrested him. But this case kind of got a little attention, but not as much as Rachel's did. And now, though, that there's a correlation here between potentially two gang members who are foreign nationals in this country, and they both killed these young women. And one of them, first of all, let's kind of give a layout of 18th Street. I mean, Jeff, you've been in the prisons down in El Salvador and MS-13. You know, help us understand the correlation between these two groups.
So when you look at everything, MS-13 18th Street was founded in the late 70s, 79 into the 80s. They're both El Salvadorian gangs initially, immigrants who fled the Civil War in El Salvador, in LA, and they formed the gangs as to protect themselves from each other, from other gangs, the Bloods, Crips, other gangs in the city of LA. And then they started getting arrested for committing crimes. Now they're committed. They're felons. They're not U.S. citizens anymore, so they get deported back to El Salvador, and they continue their war, the rivalry in El Salvador. But now the leadership is in El Salvador, and the leaders are all, up until recently, they were all in prison running the gang from inside the prison systems. And you would have it where they wouldn't mingle the gangs together in prisons. They'd have here's a prison MS-13, here's a prison 18th Street. So you'd have different prisons that would cater to the different gangs. But the gangs were very powerful in the prison. I mean, the leaders are in there. Money's funneled in. They had cell phones to communicate. If the El Salvadoran government would put cell phone towers up, blockers to keep the cell phones from working, they'd meet with priests and give their orders to the priests who come out of the prison and then issue the orders to everyone on the street. So you have these two powerful gangs running everything. And I mean, you go back to 2015, 2016, you take a country the size of Massachusetts, where they were averaging, 7,000 to 8,000 murders a year. That's why you had, per 100,000 people population, you had 103 to around 103 people being killed a year per 100,000. So that averages out to around 7,000 to 8,000 people being murdered a year in 2015 and 2016. And so El Salvador actually in 2016 classified MS-13 as a terrorist organization due to the fact that when things didn't go the way MS-13 wanted, they would go after the government and say, hey, we're going to bomb buses. We're going to do all these terrorist type actions. I mean, El Salvador was the most violent country in the Western Hemisphere and one of the most violent countries in the world. And so these two gangs are fighting each other, and they were exporting that violence to the United States.
And go ahead.
And,
No,
go
I
ahead.
interrupted you. No, finish your thought. My bad.
So you go back to 2015, 2016, Boston experienced this violence initially, and you saw it continuing around the country into the later part of 2016, 2017, because as you mentioned earlier, the gang task force I was assigned to, I was the lead case agent. One of the troopers I worked with for 20 years was my partner. We made the largest federal RICO case against MS-13. And not only did we touch Boston, but we touched other areas around the country all the way back to El Salvador. And
Okay, so that's a really good point because I want to show real fast and don't lose me on that thought real fast. Okay, but I want to show the audience real quick. Okay, so this red dot here is where Rachel Morin's killer. This was the first SA in LA. And if we look at the blue dot to the left there, that's Florence and Normandy, where the LA riots started, okay, back in the day. And I want the audience to understand that, you know, these neighborhoods within South Central Los Angeles, and here's another one that goes, you know, from the attack site where the individual attacked the young girl in South Central Los Angeles, and then he later fled to Maryland. And if you see the green dot up there, that's the beginning of the 18th Street neighborhood. Now, he's from El Salvador, and help the audience understand those dynamics a little bit more. And there are so many gangs in this area. This is all South Central Los Angeles. It's 77th precinct, precinct with division in LAPD. I mean, it is literally rock and roll. And the only reason I know that is because, you know, I was there. Okay. And this is me and the LA riots on the right. And then my old partner, Rich Davis. And this was us at night, you know, during the I don't know what we want to call it, but what I want the audience to understand is the power of these gangs. And you've only touched on it just a second. Your scope of dealing with these guys is on a much, I mean, it's a transnational scope. It's not just, you know, hey, you're here, you know, chasing radio calls. You're out there in an international set. Help us understand what that was like to what you're seeing today.
so typically what I've seen is the violence between MS-13 and 18th Street up until recently has been contained to within their own community, right? So you go to any area of the country, LA, Houston, North Carolina, and Charlotte, New Jersey, New York, Long Island, Boston. There's places now around the other places around the country, but wherever you have a large Central American population, MS-13 and 18th Street battled, and it was very rare that you saw their violence, their extortions, their targeting of anyone other than other Central Americans. And recently we've seen that switch where we had this victim in Maryland, the 20-year-old young girl was raped and murdered. You had the mother last year of 5, she was raped and murdered, right? And so we've seen, and it's unfortunately it's not just these MS-13 members. I mean, it's spreading throughout other gangs that are coming across the border, Venezuelan gang members. They're no longer keeping it strictly of MS-13 versus 18th Street, MS-13, 18th Street's targeting Central Americans. I think one of the things that we've seen is, due to the effects of what the president in El Salvador has done, you've seen a loss of control by the MS-13 leadership. With the old prison systems where they could still communicate, issue orders, they were very, very well organized. And right now, because they're not able to communicate, they've been put in that supermax type prison that they just built, and they're funneling every MS-13 member in there, and there's no way to communicate out. And some of the laws that they've made, where if you were to pass communications from MS-13 leadership from in the prisons to other MS-13, you're off to jail, right? They find out, you're off to jail. There's that lack of leadership, and right now, from what I understand, from what I've seen, my study so far has shown that the LA cliques, the Hollywood program, they're trying to come in and take over, but you have all these other programs, other cliques around the country and El Salvador say, well, why are you going to be able to take over, right? So without that leadership to keep them focused on Central Americans, you're going to have MS-13 gang members who are just going to target whoever they want to target. And that's what we're starting to see now. And that's the big difference. But MS-13 has always been extremely violent. I've never seen a gang as quick to kill their rivals, as quick to kill suspected informants of their gang, quick to kill anyone within their gang who they suspect of underhand sneakiness on their parts, right? I've locked up some very violent gang members, and I had one who, after he did his jail sentence, came out and wanted to work for me, and I did put him to work for some things. And then he found out about this case after it was all done. And, hey, Jeff, why didn't you call me and ask me to do this? I go, dude, you're one of the most violent guys I ever locked up single, as a single guy. He was one of the most violent gang members I've ever locked up. But I said, every single one of these MS-13 gang members is you on steroids, right? I don't know if I gave you the video, but on some of the videos I have in our case where you have gang members admitting to the murders they committed. And
actually, I do have one. And do you want me to? I'll play that right now for everybody. And you set the stage here, everybody. If this is actually an undercover video that Jeff and his group worked. I think this was a homicide from 2015.
Correct.
Okay, so
we have an informant in the gang. He became a homeboy, and this is what we wired up his car. So we had the car equipped with audio, video, surveillance equipment, and he gets this guy Animal to admit.
No, si nosotros hemos hecho pedos en la calle con estos morritos, yo los he andado también allí, los hemos andado topando cuerdas.
¿Y cuántos trabos le pegaste?
El culero les han pegado los 3 puyones yo, pero era una ondita diva, bonita, y el pedo estaba
que... cuchillo más, el que sabrá igualito, el que el de más.
Ya habrá, el pedo está que el culero.
So he has just committed a homicide.
He committed a homicide. This is October, and he committed the homicide in September of 2015 in East Boston.
And he's talking about it in this video.
He's now talking about it here. And this is when our case, based on this video, once we got this video and we talked to the source and he told us what happened, we had to end our case. And we met with the U.S. attorney, the district attorney, and we immediately started the grand jury process, because this came out at the end of October, and by November 1st, we started the grand jury, because this is the only evidence we had to be able to put this guy in jail for murder. So we had murders that took place before this, but we had other witnesses. We had other ways of getting those MS-13 gang members off the streets, and allowed our investigation to continue. Here, we started the whole process of ending the investigation, because this was singular to our one source. And if we had arrested him without going to the grand jury and indicting everyone, we would have had, 60 some people off fleeing everywhere. So, we started the process of indicting everyone, and it took us 2.5 months to do so because of all the evidence we had against so many different targets.
Good job. And you know what's fascinating about this as we watch, I'm going to play it through, is they're just so casual. They're just so casual. Now, I know you've attended a lot of Senate meetings and stuff like that, and we'll get to that. But I mean, this is pretty atypical for these guys, right? I mean, they came off a civil war, and I think people forget that. I mean, go ahead.
Yes, they came out, they fled the Civil War. They're exposed to the violence that Americans have never been exposed to. And then after committing crime, after the gang was formed and they go back to El Salvador, they just went, to me, when it first formed in 79 and in the early 80s, it was a typical US gang, right? Yes, they were El Salvadoran immigrants, but they were living in the States. And so they did typical gangbanger stuff. They'd shoot, they'd do whatever. But when they went back to El Salvador, it morphed. And that's where you saw, okay, the requirement now is to kill 5 people to become a homeboy. So, according to the FBI's definition of a serial killer, 2 or more people. Well, now you've got kids as young as 11 being recruited into the gang. By 15, they're homeboys. That means by 15 years old, they've killed 5 people at a minimum. My partner and I, we've interviewed people that have killed 30, 40 people. And I can remember coming out of one interview and the U.S. attorney was with us saying, oh, that's baloney. There's no way. And we're like, actually, it's very legit. Go back to where, when I went to El Salvador in March of 2015, they're averaging 22 murders a day. My partner went back in September and they were averaging 52, 53 murders a day. Again, in a country the size of Massachusetts. Can you imagine the horror? And it's not like, oh, I just shoot you. I mean, they want you to get wet, meaning you have to take a knife, be in close, because when you're stabbing, and it's not like, oh, stab. It's like they're trying to hack your head off. They're hacking off, they're going to town on you. Some of our victims, this case, if when you continue to play, he'll say, I stabbed him 3 times. But we had victims in our case where the victims are stabbed 40 to 50 times.
Yeah, just brutal.
Just
All
brutal.
right, let's keep moving here, right?
¿Y dónde lo pegaste? ¿En el pecho o en
El
la...?
pedo está que el primero lo pegué aquí, va, y caía muerto, va, y le llegué, va, cuando ya estaba detrás del yo, va, y ya le llegué y me quedó viendo los dos y me dijo, va, si le iba a reventar, si le iba a apoyar, pues yo le dije, el pedo está, le dije que Simón, le dije, la Mara te controla, chavala, le dije yo, va.
¿Y todavía te habló?
Por eso, y el loco estaba ahí derribado, va, y después se paró todavía, va, y yo al mirado cuando había parado, va.
Sabes que ese maldito tenía aire, vos, porque yo le pegué un batazo en la cabeza y se me paró, fíjate, también.
Ah, pues de culero ya sabrá qué pedo, va, el culero se paró y me dijo, esta la vas a pagar, me dijo. Y yo al otro lado de la calle ya, va, pero el más yo sabía qué pedo, la onda que le había tirado, lo que le había hecho, yo sabía que es lo que...
¿Ya lo habías puñaleado en la espalda? ¿O todavía no?
El pedo está, por eso, y el loco, y yo ya me iba chiviando, ya estaba derribado, pues, y yo me iba chiviando, pensando que...
Yeah, I mean, this is the real deal. This guy's just out. They're out for a drive talking about how he whacked this other guy, and it's like, yeah, I was surprised he stood up. I mean, this is like hardcore, and I wonder how it's going to tie into. And then we're going to towards the end, everybody. Don't worry, Jeff will take your questions. So if you have a question, just highlight it or whatever, so it automatically gets starred by the system here. But I mean, this is like hardcore. These guys are just, they're on the streets of Boston at this place in this video.
They're driving around Boston, and here he is talking about it. And I mean, and he said, if you notice, he said, yeah, I stabbed him right here. So when we went to trial and you pull the shirt out, there's a knife wound right in the back, right? So, it shows that he's not, as you've done enough homicide investigations. The information that he's telling us is known to only the murderer and the responding law enforcement officers doing the investigation. And so,
good work for getting this. I mean, this is like unreal stuff. And of course, only here on the interview room, everybody, would you guys see this and have such a cool guest as asked Jeff on to talk about this stuff, because you're going to find out here this guy really knows what he's talking about here, evident the fact that we're already seeing it within the first 20 minutes of this program.
Más Yanel va, y el maje se paró, va.
No jodas, y te dijo.
Y me dijo, las vas a pagar, me dijo, pero no alcanzó a contar quién fue que lo timó, va. Siempre se fue, va.
¿Y qué pedo? Pero no regaste a darle.
Ajá. El pedo está que venía mujeres, todo. Y ya habrá que pedo, va.
Y entonces de maldito se para, después de que lo peleaste se paró, le dijo puta.
Si el culero va, corrió un pedacito y caía tirado, va. Entonces yo lo alcancé, va, de vuelta, va, y ya fue que lo terminé, va.
Maníaco, perro, puta, loco. Venga.
El pedo está que ese culero vaya a durar, le tenía que llevar la bestia.
Just another day at work.
To them, it's a gift to kill someone, right? Wow. It's a gift, and who are you? Who am I to take that gift away from them? And they'll spend months catfishing their victims.
What does that mean? Break that. Help people understand that.
So catfishing, they'll make a fake Facebook account or other social media account, have a photograph of a El Salvadoran girl, pretty girl, and they will make friends with their rivals, 18th Street gang members. And they'll spend 2, 3, 4 months just talking to them, getting to know them, all the while trying to develop that, oh, let's be boyfriend, girlfriend. And then what they'll do is they'll say, it's them, it's not the girl. And if I was the one catfishing you, I'll go, hey, do you want to meet tonight? And you go, sure. Okay, I'll send my cousin or my brother to pick you up, and I'll bring you to where I am. And they'll pick you up, they'll drive you to where I am, but there's 3, 4, 5 of us waiting for you. And when you come out, we'll attack you and kill you. And that happened 2 times in my case alone. It's happened many more times other than that. But I mean, it happened twice in our case. And we had, again, other tape where everyone admits to it. But we had one kid, he's laughing about it, and he's talking about how he was so close to cutting the guy's head off because he was going to take it the way they do in El Salvador and roll the head down the middle of the street of downtown Boston and East Boston to say, this is MS-13, don't mess with us. But one of the people participating in the homicide shot the victim before they were done cutting the head off, so they had to run before they were done. But that got that kid in trouble because they didn't cut off the head. And so the murder wasn't as clean as that they wanted it to be, in the sense of they succeed in cutting off the head and rolling it down the street. So
yeah, I mean, this is beyond craziness. This is like war stuff and it's all, and you're describing this in the streets of a city in the United States, that these are things that are taking place. And, you read about, Kayla's case here. Her homicide begins in early March of 22. Her killer crossed illegally into the United States via the U.S. Into the U.S. at the Rio Grande City in Texas. He was an unaccompanied teenager, so he was 16 at the time. He was from El Salvador, but he was also a known admitted MS-13 member. But because he was under the age of 18 and not an adult, when he illegally entered the United States, he was allowed to live with someone who was listed as his aunt in Maryland. And an NGO plugged him into a room of an apartment that Kayla had. They had an apartment with various rooms, and he stayed there with her 22-year-old boyfriend also in the house. And Kayla, everybody, was an autistic 20-year-old young woman in Maryland while renting a room in this mobile home. When Kayla, working 2 jobs, one at a cleaning company and another at a grocery store, she was determined to live herself independently and make her way into the world. However, on July 22nd, 22, this MS-13 gang member was allowed into her trailer because the landlord working with the NGO was an illegal immigrant himself. So he plugged this savage into the room, i.e., the same mobile home as Kayla. So that, that in of itself is disturbing. And, the fact that these are that just recently happened in 2022, and a year later, we have Rachel running on a path, a mother of 5, and she's attacked and taken down. And they're not saying that these two cases are connected. They're saying he's connected to 18th Street. Okay. And so explain to the audience one more time, Jeff. And by the way, this is for everybody. There is a remembrance and a celebration of her life where she would have been 22, July 27th, 2024. And at Mount Trashmore, I don't know where that's at, but you can find out more just by typing in Kayla Hamilton. And if you're in the Maryland area and you want to attend this event, you may do that. So Aberdeen PD arrests this guy. He's 17 at the time they arrested him. He's 17. Hispanic male has been arrested for the July 22 murder of 20-year-old Kayla Hamilton. An extensive investigation was conducted by the Aberdeen Police Department, CID, who was assisted by the Maryland State Police Homicide Unit, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Hamilton's death was determined by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner to be a homicide by strangulation. Detectives learned from Hamilton's family that she was autistic and had recently moved to Aberdeen with her 22-year-old boyfriend. Early in the investigation, a 17-year-old male became a person of interest and was later determined to be an undocumented non-citizen from El Salvador. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was able to verify that he was also listed in El Salvador as a member. How do you pronounce that, by the way? Malva.
It's supposed to be Mara Salvatrucha. They spelled that wrong. It's not Malva, it's Mara.
Okay. Mara Salvatrucha. Chucha? Is that how you pronounce it? Okay. MS-13. The suspect's DNA was compared to evidence recovered on the crime scene by the Maryland State Police Forensic Science Division. The test results led to the issuance of an arrest warrant, first-degree murder, January 14, 23. The suspect was apprehended in Edgewood, Maryland during the early morning hours of January 15. He is currently being held without bail at the Hartford County Detention Center. Now, here's a crazy thought. I know who this guy is. I know his name. But because at the time he was arrested, he was a juvenile in Maryland, they won't let me. They've told us don't release his name. But if you go to the Hamilton County Jail and you type in, certain things, you'll find this guy's name. But we're not allowed under Maryland law to talk about this guy, even though now he is 18 years old. He's 18 years old today. And so out of respect for, talking to the authorities back there, I'm not going to tell you his name, but I would hope that a larger segment of the media out there will be able to get around that rule with their lawyers. I just don't have a boat full of lawyers behind me. I only have a couple, and so we'll let the lawyers fight it out. But Jeff, share with us, that's a lot of information to take in. That this guy is plugged into that house, and next thing you know he's attacking this young girl. And do these guys even process that they could be captured? I don't get this.
It's part of the gang is the gang, right? And they understand the risk of being a part of the gang and the possibility of going to jail. Most gang members as a whole do that, right? It's not that they want to get caught, they want to stay out, but they know that they can get caught, right? So, I mean, I would say, again, if you go back to the time frame of 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and there was a lot of headlines, most of the time, if you saw it, it was against that Central American population still. So it would make a headline, but it kind of died down quickly, right? I mean, our case, the only time we had, I mean, we had the mother who had fled her abusive husband, who took she got shot, but it wasn't that she was targeted. She looked out the window because she heard the fight outside, and around when the MS-13 gang member fired at the rival gang, he missed and hit her, right? But most of the time, up until recently, they target their own. So I don't think it made the headlines when something atrocious would happen, but it wouldn't stay in our, the country as a whole, the press would move on because it's like, oh, it's just Central Americans on Central Americans. Now that they're targeting actually U.S. citizens, it's changing. But I mean, you look at these numbers here that you've got on the screen right now. These are the known unaccompanied minors crossing our border per fiscal year.
Okay, so help the because I know you're also a visiting scholar at Boston College, but break this down to help people understand exactly what unaccompanied minors means.
So, the most of the unaccompanied minors crossing the border are from the Northern Triangle, which is El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And that's now where MS-13 and 18th Street are. That, it was found in El Salvador, but it includes those three countries. So in our case, back in 2015, 2016, when I was the case agent working with the state police, we looked at a lot of this because we had a lot of unaccompanied minors in Boston. And a majority of those unaccompanied minors are kids who, whatever relative they were living with in El Salvador or Guatemala, the mom, the grandma, whoever they were living with, wanted to get them out of the violence and up to the States because they thought, okay, they can flee. So, and this is going to take a little bit of time, so be patient.
You got all the time you need.
So the trip from the Northern Triangle to the southern border is a horrendous trip. They're on a train. They call, and women, the young girls can be sexually assaulted, raped. It's a horrendous journey. But again, the majority of these kids are innocent. But out of this whole figures, whatever year it is, and we'll just start off with 2014. Out of 57,000 kids coming across our border, there is a group who are already in the gang as paros or chicayos, and that means they're low level members. They're trying to join the gang to become homeboys, but they haven't committed their 5 murders yet. They're very new. They can still be very new, and sometimes the parents think, well, let me get them out of here to the States where they can get away from the gang. But the parents don't realize once they're in the gang, they're in the gang. They may not be a homeboy yet, but they're in the gang. So they have, they're now, here's the majority, but then here's a small minority. But on top of that, there's even a smaller minority that are full-blown homeboys. And the reason why they're coming to the States, like these homeboys, is one, they want MS-13 homeboys to run the cliques here in the States. So on this whole train ride up, you've got the homeboys who are tasking the paros and chicayos to start making friends with all the innocent kids. So once they get here and they get settled and they get reunited with whoever their sponsor is, they're now being fully recruited into the gang and they're being forced. You're either joining MS or 18th, or because not only do you have MS-13 on this this train and coming across the border, you also have 18th Street, and they're the rivals. But they're not fighting per se on the train to get here, but they'll start the war back up once they get to their sponsors. So in Boston, which we saw all the time, is you'd have all these kids are coming in, they get to the school, they're in school and they're hanging out with who they thought were their friends, and now they're being told, "Well, you're going to join MS. You're going to join 18th Street. You're joining one of us, right?" But you have some kids who don't even know that they're making friends with both MS and 18th Street. So once MS saw, "Oh, you're on Facebook and you're friends with an 18th. I thought you were hanging with us." Now they go, "Well, I need to kill someone to get my homeboy status. Hey, let's go smoke pot," and they kill him. And you got a kid who doesn't even know that he's friends with either or, and he's being killed just because he's hanging out with people he has no clue who they are. It's very it's very tough, but that's what we have here with all these kids coming across the border. We have a mix of innocent to full-blown serial killers all coming across the border, and because they're under 18, El Salvador won't share their criminal histories with us because they don't have, at least in 2016, 2017, 2018, they had no way of tracking. El Salvador didn't have a way of tracking criminal histories for minors, so they couldn't share it with us. And in 2018, when I went to the Senate Intelligence Committee meeting, it was either 17 or 18. I think it was actually 17. You know, at the beginning, the senator even stated, "Yeah, we had people who admitted being homeboys, but they still they got to cross the country, cross the boundary and come in the state, and then get sent to wherever their sponsors are. And then half the time when they get to their sponsors, they leave them. Right? They're members of the gang. They don't want to hang out with dad anymore. They haven't seen dad or mom or whoever for 10 years. Like, who are you? I'm going to go hang out with my fellow gang members," and they go to the destroyer house and hang out at the destroyer house. That's what they call their gang house, the destroyer house. And they hang out there and they plot who they're going to kill, how they're going to kill. They go out just as they do in El Salvador and they patrol. The video you saw, that kid was out patrolling, looking for 18th Street gang members to kill. And he found one, chased him down, and killed him. And that's exactly what they do. I mean, and at times they're very sophisticated. I mean, they'll take and wear 18th Street clothes, the colors, like MS-13, they're blue, blue clothing, blue shirts. They wear
so do they get along with Crips? I mean,
no,
okay.
No, they don't, but they still pick the color blue. And Chicago Bulls has because of the horns, right?
Does that cause? Well, the guy in Rachel Morin's case had a Chicago Bulls hat, but it was no, it was a Nike. It was a Nike hat. Just do it with the Michael Jordan logo at the top.
Yeah.
Is that correlated in any way to 18th Street? Because
18th Street would be red. Was it a red hat? I can't remember.
Yes, it was red.
If it was red, that the color red goes to 18th Street.
Okay, interesting.
So
these hardcore, what do you call the leaders? What are the leaders called?
Homeboys. The lead, they're still a homeboy. So you may be so if you're promoted to the leader of the clique, you're the first word, the palabra, which means I'm the leader. But every homeboy has an equal vote. So if I want to make a rule up for the clique, I'm the first word and you're my second word, we put a vote out and every homeboy votes. And then we can make the rule. It's not like I just come in and it's not like the blood, I'm the leader of the clique or the set of the Bloods or whatever. It's we get votes. Cliques. But back in the day before they got locked up and couldn't communicate anymore, the Laramfa was the head of MS-13 and they were all in prison. And they would send their directives out to the leaders on the streets who would keep sending them out down. So you have what's called programs. So East Coast program would typically take care of, Maryland, North Carolina, DC, Northern Virginia, Boston, maybe some parts of New York. We had some East Coast program cliques in Ohio. But these targets
here. Put a chart up here that you put together a long time ago.
Yes.
Break this down for us in terms of what we're looking at.
So we broke these down by cliques. So you have the East Boston local sabotage. These were 3 targets we took out of East Boston. The Infirmos, the East Side, the Trace, which was for Somerville, Hollywood. Now, Hollywood, we took off some Hollywood, but Hollywood was still, they're their own program. They didn't fall under the East Coast program. And then you had ELS, which is Everett Loco Salvatrucha. So these were all targets that we took off the streets in Boston. We had more than just this. But everyone but besides Hollywood, they fell under the East Coast program. And so in the United States, the East Coast program was led by Jose Martinez, Chucky. And we actually had an East Coast program meeting, and our source was invited to the meeting in December of 2015. And we were at
he's out of Virginia.
He was in Virginia. Yes, in Richmond. He was in Richmond, but he would talk directly to the East Coast program leaders in El Salvador. And so he held a meeting. So a lot of the East Coast cliques all came to Richmond, Virginia. Well, they hung out actually in Dunloring, Virginia, but they drove down to Richmond, Virginia for the meeting, met up with Chucky, and Chucky, they all met for breakfast, and they had their chiqueos walking around the breakfast place looking for cops and us.
What are chiqueos?
We were there watching them.
Like spies?
What's that?
They're chiqueos. Is that like surveillance guys?
Chiqueo. So when you come into the gang, you're observed. Then you become a paro. Sometimes it's reversed. It depends. But the very low level, when you start committing crimes and you're gaining more respect, you become a chiqueo. And then you become a homeboy when you've committed your murders. So they had chiqueos, low-level members, who weren't allowed to attend the meeting, but they were doing counter surveillance around the restaurant.
Interesting.
And then they went to Chucky's house, and Chucky had all the leaders from all the cliques. So you had back in Dunloring, back in Virginia, at the hotel, you had probably maybe 30, 40 gang members who weren't allowed to go to Richmond, who were just hanging out up there. But, you had around 20 leaders who all drove down to Richmond or up from North Carolina to Richmond, and they all had a meeting. And our source brought in a leader from Boston, and then on the drive to Richmond, he had one of the leaders from Ohio with him. And they go to this meeting, and that was the first time we heard them discussing taking their violence outside of the gang, outside of the community, and targeting actual Americans, because they were mad that you had teachers in schools who were trying to convince kids not to join the gangs, and they were angry and said, should we go after the teachers? They were discussing killing teachers because the teachers were trying to prevent them from recruiting. They didn't make a decision then, but we had during this meeting the leader from El Salvador, the East Coast program, called in and giving instructions to how they wanted homicides to take place, how they wanted, hey, we want people to actually give us the plans of how they're going to commit some of these homicides, so it's not done sloppily, because we want to make sure it's done and it's done properly, because some of the times, based on so many of our EMTs coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, learning how to do battlefield wounds better, people they thought that they had killed were being saved by the paramedics until they could get to the hospital. So they said, we want to really plan this. So tell us your plans, other than when we send you out patrolling. But, if you're out to catfish someone, we want to know the plans. We want you to make sure you're recruiting properly, because they were recruiting people who, as they said in this meeting, the FBI is recruiting them to be informants, and we can't let that happen. And they talked literally about, if we find an informant, you kill them. If you can't find them, you kill their families. And so for us, I had to bring 16 to 20 family members from El Salvador and Guatemala to the States
for protection.
For the protection.
Wow.
After this case.
Okay, so this is important, really important information, in my opinion, especially in today's environment. Looks like, some of these folks are just walking across, the border and just saying, where do I go? Evident the fact we have two of these guys, if not more, now even the Venezuelans that killed that young girl at the convenience store, and the list just goes on. And the body count just keeps getting bigger in this country. In my opinion, it's a real problem. And as you know, in Southern California, I work the border. I mean, my agency was 32 miles from the border, San Ysidro. In Oceanside, we had Camp Pendleton right there, one of the largest military installations in the country. And we used to deal with these guys, not these guys. In my time, we didn't have MS-13. We had East Coast, rolling 60s, yada, yada, out of LA that would come south and they'd hit our town like you were talking about, just regular gangbangers, right? Selling dope, drive-bys, etc. But these guys, this is a terrorist organization. It's structured. I mean, I'm looking at your chart here and going, okay, wait a minute. These guys, this is just one operation that you took down in Massachusetts. And for the chat, yes, he did get all these guys. Jeff was the case agent that he and his partner that took these people, thank goodness, off of the street. There's some up there. It looks like there's still one up there. Frankie Rodriguez, or AKA Hollywood, is a fugitive. I don't know if you guys ended up finally catching him.
No, a few of them got back to El Salvador and did not come back, or have yet not to. But we have their we had one who did try and come across the border again, and he got picked up. And he was going to trial, but we superseded last year on him because initially we only had him as an undocumented or an illegal alien, whatever you want to call him.
Right.
And possession of a firearm, so it was not allowed.
That's a moving target. It changes every couple of months.
Right, but after he crossed the border again, and we arrested him, we superseded and charged him with RICO conspiracy. So his charge went from just being a undocumented and possession of firearm to actually RICO conspiracy, as everyone else here was indicted. But yes, a few people, sometimes after they've committed a murder or done something, they get picked up by ICE and they don't fight extradition and they go right back to the country. And so we have a few, we don't have extradition treaty with El Salvador. So I have 4 or 5 fugitives in El Salvador right now. Our case, we indicted the first MS-13 leader who was never in the States during the investigation. We indicted him on our investigation, but we'll never get him back to this country because we just don't have the extradition treaties.
And this is an important piece to understand, as Jeff is explaining. Karen makes it very clear here. But Jeff is saying these gang leaders in El Salvador, and there's pressure now from the Salvadoran government that's probably even pushing them north, into Guatemala or, up into the United States through the southern border. But when they get up here, they are recruiting kids who are already, gang members who are already in a gang, typically. Right. And they're recruiting them over. And if they don't, they get pretty brutal. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
They'll recruit the non-gang members, the members who are already the Paros and Jaqueos, the level members. They're already being dictated of who to report to when they get in the States, how they're going to continue their process to become full-blown homeboys.
I would agree with this. Netflix needs to pick Jeff up and do a series on this. I would agree with that 1,000%. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No worries. It's the kids fleeing the violence who have not yet joined a gang. They're being recruited, and that's very brutal on them. It's very stressful for them because they think they're fleeing everything to get here to be told they have to join.
Look at this. In Oahu, newly released convicts from the mainland were getting one-way tickets to Oahu. They don't even need identification to get there. The crime rate there is skyrocketing in the last 6 years. I mean, we're talking, the craziness here. We've gone into cray-cray land here in this problem. And
Well-
this is beyond just two political parties, in my opinion. It's past, these guys, those guys, and those guys in the middle. This is a national threat to this country.
It's more than just the stupidity of our leaders everywhere.
Yeah.
For example, in my case, we had somebody who we knew was affiliated with MS-13, and the steps that we had to take to have him deported because he was a minor still was insane. And the only reason, why we finally got it to work was, one, we had everything to show he was still MS-13, but we had to go behind the scenes to say, if you don't deport him, he will be killed, because right now MS-13 thinks he's an informant for the police. I approached him, I talked to him and his father and said, hey, look, the gang thinks you're cooperating with the law enforcement. They're going to kill you. Well, I'm not a member of the gang. I know you're a member of the gang. We have this evidence to show you're a member of the gang. And we had to deport him, right? But we had to, but to deport is so hard today for any of these kids. We have a kid in Boston, MS-13, who killed somebody. We didn't know yet at that time, because this happened after my 2016 case, but I worked as a supervisor for the squad. The task force kept working stuff. So we had another murder, we were working it. And one of these kids that was picked up for being MS-13 is able to convince the immigration judge that he wasn't MS-13, that he wore the clothing just because he liked the colors. He had the knives that all MS-13 gang members carried just because he liked knives. The other things that we knew that we could point to, he was able to convince the judge that we were lying. He got out, and 2 weeks after getting out and not getting deported, he kills again. Now, he gets locked up on something, not for that charge. And while he's in jail, I have an informant or a cooperator. I wouldn't say a full informant, but I have an MS-13 member who's in jail cooperating with us. We wire him up, and he admits to how he lied and got himself out and killed again. So that way we could charge him with the murder. His second murder that he would have never committed if they just deported him. But they wouldn't do it because, God forbid, you trust law enforcement today and the information that we have. And so, and again, it doesn't make the huge news because it was Central American on Central American violence, El Salvadoran on El Salvadoran. But now that we're seeing that the leadership is in such disarray with the new laws in El Salvador, no one's taking effect, you're seeing the gang members where they're no longer in check and just saying, hey, we're going to keep targeting our own. They're going to target anyone else that comes in contact with them that they want to target. And it happened here in Maryland twice, right? We've got the young girl, and she was probably an easy target because she was autistic, right? Yeah. MS-13 had been in Boston for several years, but it didn't come to light until 2002 when MS-13 raped two girls.
Yeah, I remember that.
Were
teenage girls, right?
Teenage girls, but one was in a wheelchair. One was also
I remember that.
Right? So, I mean, they're now branching out, and it's something that we have to look at because it's not just MS-13. It's, over the past several months to the last couple of years, we're seeing all kinds of criminals who are crossing the border committing.
Well, and hold that thought, because let's listen for a moment to reality. To your point, I want to dovetail into your thought process here. July 27, 2022. This was just recently, within a couple of years. The individual that killed Kayla went into her room. He startles her, and she grabs her phone and calls her boyfriend. That call went to voicemail. So she's on the phone. The murderer grabs her iPod charger and wraps it around her neck and strangles her. The voicemail of this strangulation is 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. The murderer then violently essays her post-mortem. Her boyfriend comes home because he didn't pick up the phone and discovers her deceased on the floor. That the cord was wrapped around her so tight that there are some other details that are just horrific. I'm not going to read those. But her mother, Kayla's mother, goes to Congress and testifies about the death of her sweet daughter. And this didn't get a lot of attention in this country. But it was right before Rachel Morin was murdered in Maryland. What I find an interesting nexus, and Jeff, maybe you can give us a little better understanding of this, is these guys just don't show up in these communities. They come to I would suspect, a group of people or friends or associates somehow that are connected within that geographic region. This kid just doesn't show up in Aberdeen, Maryland as an MS-13 gangbanger and not know others, or do they? And is the government spreading them all around the country? I don't know.
Well, the way it's supposed to work is that, Chris, I'm making you my MS-13 unaccompanied minor.
Okay.
Across the border, you turn yourself in, because all the kids are told, turn yourself in. And then they get placed into a facility where their sponsors are supposed to be checked out. So during my case, this happened all the time. You get all these kids who come across the border, they turn themselves in, they're in this facility, they're being medically treated, they're seeing doctors to make sure they're healthy, or, meanwhile, their sponsors are being checked out. And so, let's say you have a few hundred people across the border, 200 out of the 1,000 or their sponsors are here in Boston. And then they would be flown to an ICE facility in Boston and then reunited with their sponsor. The problem is what happens after they're reunited with their sponsor. So yes, typically you're going to start seeing them, if they're members of the gang, whether they're a Paro, a Chicao, which are low levels. Like, I would call them, like, if you remember, like Hell's Angels, right? Until you're a full-blown Hell's Angel, you're on that probation period. So you don't get the full Hell's Angels California tab on the back of your vest, right? So you're a Paro Chicao, you go to your sponsor, your homeboy, you go to your sponsor. Well, homeboys are going to be like, yeah, I'm not living here. I don't know. Chris, I'm your dad, Chris, right? You haven't seen me in 10 years. I may be married with new kids. You don't know me from a hole in the wall. And you're just like, and I don't have the ability at that age to really monitor you a lot. So half the time you're out and you're hanging out with other MS-13 members and you're going wherever they're going. So for us in Boston, I can remember I woke up in July of 2015 and I saw the headlines that there's this stabbing of a Central American in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And I said, holy crap. I'm reading this. I'm saying to myself right away, this is MS-13. This is an MS-13 killing, because I just, knowing the way they killed, I knew this was MS-13. I said, we haven't seen MS-13 that far north. But lo and behold, I drive into Lawrence and start driving around. I start seeing the tagging, gang tagging.
Tell them what tagging is so the audience knows.
It's a spray paint, right? Yeah. So you put MS-13, you'll spray paint. And up into that time, most of the gangs that I had worked off in Lawrence had all been Latin Kings, Latin Gangster Disciples, other Hispanic type gangs like that. But this is the first time I'd seen MS-13 in Lawrence. And lo and behold, it was MS-13, and I helped flip a kid who had been picked up by ICE who committed the murder, right? So we were able to make that case as well. But my point being is, Odds are, yes, there was some other MS-13 in Aberdeen that brought that kid to that area after he got, he wanted to go somewhere. Because most of the time, they're not going to go by themselves. They want to stay in a Central American community. And I was taught this back in 2002, 2001 timeframe. If you have a Central American community of El Salvadoran, Guatemalan, Honduran, you have MS in 18th Street. It's just, they're there. You may not know they're there, but they're there. And again, going back to my case, when we had that East Coast Leadership Program meeting in 2015, December 2015, on the drive down to Richmond, the Ohio leader tells our source on tape, yeah, we just killed this MS-13 guy. We buried the body next to a body we buried a few months before. We thought it was good, but some dog walker, her dog smelled the body, started digging up the body. So they found the two bodies and gave us a lot of information. So once we got that tape and I listened to it, I called Ohio, the FBI out in Columbus, Ohio. I said, hey, did you guys just find two bodies? And he goes, you can tell right away, like, there's something like, why are you calling me? What do you know about this? I go, yeah, I've got a tape right now where I've got this MS-13 leader who's admitting to his clique killed him. Wow. And he's like, oh, I thought we were all good with MS-13. And turned out, based on my tip to them, they made a 22 RICO conspiracy case against the MS-13 cliques out in Columbus, Ohio, and solved 5 homicides, not just the 2 we gave them, but 3 more. And showed, and this is one of the reasons why they come to the United States, because again, here's what we're not thinking of. In El Salvador, if you have MS-13 in a neighborhood, every business is extorted. Every taxi cab that comes in there, every bus, every bodega, there isn't anything that isn't taxed. It happens here in the States. And it never gets reported. Why? Because, again, you and I are going to play MS-13. You're El Salvadoran. You own a bodega here in California. I come in. Oh, you're from El Salvador? Where? You go, oh, I'm from San Salvador. Oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But I take your information. I go home. That night, I'm texting my friends back in El Salvador. Find out about anyone who's related to Chris in El Salvador. And they get back to me in a week. And I come back in the next week and I go, okay, Chris, you're going to pay me $50 a week. And if you say no, but you say no, I go, okay, great, thanks. Next day I come in because I just had your aunt or someone killed or your family. I come in and show the photo. Okay, you're going to pay me $75 a week, right? And you're going to, and I said, and here's your aunt. Who's next in your family that I'm going to kill if you don't start paying me? And you're going to pay me, because what are you going to do? It's not like we can move every family member for every person who cooperates with us to the United States, right? So you go, I don't know what's going on in El Salvador, but I can't protect my family here. The police here aren't going to be able to protect me because they're not going to be able to protect my family there. They may be able to protect me here, but not my family. So I'll just pay the $75 a month or a week or whatever it is. And so, again, that's what's going on here in this country, in these communities that no one knows about. And they don't feel safe approaching anyone because they go, you can't keep my family safe down there.
I'm going to pull up while you're thinking here. Some folks have asked for pictures of their tags, and so I'm just going to pull up some photographs for everybody so you can see these types of individuals. I'll just pull this one up. Can everybody see that?
They don't tattoo as frequently now because they know that we use them. And in El Salvador, they made it illegal to have an MS-13 tattoo. That would land you in jail for at least 5 years. So right now, but if you go back if you go scroll back up a little bit. Hold on. Right there, you see that's the wall. See the big MS with the big horns, the fingers thrown up like that.
That one?
That's a different one. There was another one, but that's MS-13. But if you look into it's the second from the right on the bottom. You see the big MS?
Oh, got it with the horns.
Yes, that one.
Somebody said that these guys are into Satan worship. Is that true?
It's not that they're into Satan. It's kind of like, are you familiar with the with Folk Nation and People Nation gangs?
I'm not.
All right. So in the States, our Land Kings, they're People Nation. And they go by the five crown, the 5-pointed star. Folk Nation would be our gangster disciples, our Crips, and they do the 6-sided star. So, and they're the pitchfork. So it's not that they're devil worshippers, but they kind of they go that way. So People Nation, they're going to be kind of like saying, "Oh, we're God." That way, Folk Nation, devil. MS-13, they say they walk with the beast. They walk with the devil. It's not that they're worshiping the devil like that, or they're satanic worshipers. It's just they walk with the devil. That's why they throw the horns up.
You can see these little horn things going
Yes.
in their hands, like you're talking about.
So
Can even see it in
you
the
know the tape you played. The last thing he goes, "I had the beast walking with me because the beast is walking with me while I commit my murder, and that's my gift to take that person's life."
Well, and I mean, these are some pretty serious looking homies here.
Oh yeah,
That
you get an MS-13 unless you're a homeboy. So when you get the MS-13 tattoo, you're a full blown homeboy. You've killed someone. And as I said, if you're in El Salvador, you've killed 5. And this happens by the time they're 15. So you've got 15-year-olds in those numbers crossing our border because a 15-year-old homeboy from El Salvador has a ton more respect by any MS-13 member compared to an American promoted homeboy. So if I was not a homeboy and I got promoted here, I won't have the same kind of respect that I would have if I had been promoted in El Salvador.
Wow. And I'm going to show this one here. This is, I just did a Google search, MS-13 Maryland. Look what came up. All of this. MS underneath the shirt. Kayla's case comes up. These guys.
Maryland has a very large Central American population, has a huge problem with MS 18th Street.
Oh, look at this guy.
Maryland, D.C., Northern Virginia, huge MS-13. North Carolina and Charlotte, MS-13. Northern New Jersey, New York, Long Island, MS. Rhode Island, Boston, MS.
Look at them. Look at all these different states. North Carolina. Man, these guys have really.
But they're overseas. I did after our show last year on MS-13, Chris. Australia contacted me, and I did a documentary that I aired a couple of weeks ago down in Australia.
Oh, cool!
And I'm waiting for the YouTube because they will. Obviously we don't get Australian television shows here, but
right.
Once they release it to YouTube, they'll let me have the link to see what we did. But they went down and toured the new prison in El Salvador, saw some of the new laws. And I will say the laws have definitely changed El Salvador, in the sense that it is now one of the, if not the most, it's one of the safest countries in the Western Hemisphere. But I'm just concerned, as I told the Australian news channel, to me, I'm very concerned because I'm a big believer of doing the hard right over the easy wrong. Because my thought is, when I lock somebody up, I want to make sure I've done it properly. I haven't violated anyone's 4th, 5th, 6th Amendments. I haven't broken the law myself to get you locked up. I've made an airtight case to put you in jail, right? Because if I lock you up, I'm taking away your freedom. And I better make sure I've locked up the right person. I don't want to lock up someone who's innocent of something and have them spend years in jail for something they haven't done. But El Salvador, they're locking up people based on me saying you're MS-13. And they're not going to trial. They're being locked up for a long time before they ever get to trial. Yes, they do have female gang members. I see that question that just got posted. You don't see as many, but there are female MS-13 members, and they're just sometimes I find female gang members to be worse than the male gang members. I had a female source briefly. She didn't work out. She was a gang member, and my partner called her and said, "We're going to call her." We gave everyone nicknames because we wouldn't use their real names, but we called her Lexi Luther because of how crazy she was. And she said, "Yeah." She said, we asked her, Jeff, are all gang members tattooed? No, some gang members are very smart, will never get tattooed. There's other things to look for, but they know we look for that now too. But for example, some gang members definitely have tattooed themselves that make it easy. But when they want to sport who they are, they'll wear their colors and they flash their colors. And Chris, you spent a lot of time. I'm sure you saw some of the gang members coming down from LA. When they get dressed up, they they look sharp. I had a blood source, and when he would put his colors on with the red and the way it matched all up and down, it's like you're looking sharp. They're looking.
They iron.
Oh yeah, they iron everything. And
so let's there's two things before you answer this one from Sad Tiger. I want to go to these statistics again.
Right.
So you've been keeping these since 2014, 20 to 2023. These are unattended minors, i.e., kid, under 18 that shows up and says, "Hey, I don't have a mom, I don't have a dad," and the federal government says, "Oh, that's okay. Come on in. We're going to plug you in." And that's what happened in this case, where this guy got put into the same house with this autistic girl, Kayla Hamilton, and ends up murdering her. But look at the difference from 2014 to 2023. But look at 2022. We had 152,000 of these guys that showed up.
Yes.
And they're still in the country. So if we add all of these up, these are crazy numbers. These are crazy numbers. We had 118,000 last year. And I love your paragraph here where you were sitting in a Senate intelligence meeting. And by the way, if you guys are just getting here, Jeff is an amazing human being, but he took these guys down on the East Coast with his partner. And we showed some of that. If you're just joining us, you're going to have to go back and watch it. And he's also a former Army Ranger. So, that's the guy's just up here and not only serving his country, but protecting us and protecting our country. You guys are the real deal. And I'm just so honored to always have you on my show here. But when we look at this, the FBI has said, look, if you kill 2 or more people, you're considered a serial killer today. Yet Jeff has educated us tonight on if you kill 5 people in El Salvador as an MS-13 gang member, then you're considered a homeboy. And these homeboys average between what are the ages? Jeff, I'll take them.
At 11.
How about, say it again?
At 11 years old, you're being recruited into the gang.
Okay.
So by 15, you've killed at least 5 people to be a homeboy.
And these homeboys are now crossing into the United States as unaccompanied minors. And you have kept these statistics, and I know you teach on this. And, is there any other way for us to see that documentary you were just in Australia, other than we have to wait till it comes over here?
There's a very Investigative Discovery did a documentary on this case. It's the show is called Feds, FEDS, all capitalized. They did 6 episodes. Each episode highlighted a case. Episode 3 highlighted Operation Mean Streets, and my partner and I are interviewed. We convinced the producers to bring in the mother of one of our 16-year-old victims. She was interviewed, the U.S. attorney, and our source. So Feds Episode 3, Mean Streets, is a documentary you can see on Investigative Discovery right now. And FBI True by CBS Paramount Plus, they're filming Mario and myself here in a few weeks. We're supposed to be on their documentary about this in a couple. I don't know when they'll air it, but that's going to be filmed. And as I said, the Australian one, I'm being told once they release it to YouTube, they'll send me a link.
Copy.
I
can you send me the link, and I'll make sure it gets to all of my audience out here.
Yes.
Okay, so
but I will say the one thing that I found very disheartening when I sat in on that Senate intelligence meeting is they never talk to the people who do the work. You know, the FBI, I love the FBI. The one thing I always find, though, is they'll take what we call our SESers, the high-level people who I'm sure you saw in the police department, right? You know, the chief. How long was the chief actually on the streets before he started rising the ranks and really new stuff, right? You know, same thing with the Bureau. So when the Bureau goes and does these meetings with the Senate, they're always talking to these people. They get a briefing, but they don't know MS-13. The meeting I was in, they were talking with three, two chiefs of police, a senior investigator, and all three they don't know MS-13. So when they're answering questions,
Laura has a critique. Okay. And so let's help Laura. Tell us about the jails that you have personally visited.
Okay, so she is absolutely right. The jails in El Salvador, they are horrendous. But the jails were run. You're in that jail as an MS-13 leader. You're still getting. You still have the ability to run the gang from inside the prison. To me, when I show up to the old El Salvadoran prisons and I'd walk in, and this is what you would see. Imagine these are sunglasses. Here are my reading glasses. But they're sunglasses. The guard comes in with a hat and a baklava, and this is all an inmate will see, other than my glasses would be shades, right? That's all the guards. You have police officers in El Salvador back then who would leave their house in civilian clothes, take a bus ride for an hour, get off, go somewhere, change into their uniforms, and come out, right? Because they don't want anyone to know where they live. I understand the president has taken extraordinary steps, made a new prison, put everyone in, and I'm not going to disagree that what he's done hasn't made El Salvadorian safer. I'm not going to say that because it did. It has. It's changed the landscape. My problem is he's not doing the hard right to tackle the problem. He's doing the easy wrong. And what happens down the road based on this system? Here's a president who was only supposed to run for one term. He's changed the law so he was reelected. What happens in 6 years? And he doesn't want to step down again. And all of a sudden you have someone who's going to run against him and say, hey, and he starts going out and starts trying to beat this president. And the president has someone come in and says, oh, this guy is associated with MS-13 and just locks him up. Do we get to a situation that caused MS-13 in the first place because we took the easy wrong to target them and not the hard right to target them? Because what happens if he continues to stay in power and all of a sudden you have another civil war and now it explodes again, which all happened in the 70s that created MS-13 and 18th Street in the first place? That's my issue. That's what I don't agree with. You know, Chris, as an investigator, when you saw how things were done as an investigator, when you came on, you saw things done before you came in, and you're like, hey, that's not quite right. We need to do things better. Did you not try and teach new cops, hey, we don't do it this way anymore. We do it this way because this is the right way to do it? That's how we should be teaching everybody, right? This is how we do it here. We're not perfect, but I would still say compared to other countries, though we may get things wrong, we still do a pretty good job of getting things right with our legal system. And we try to do the right thing. And my point is that they're not doing it the right way, and that's going to cause problems that we don't see in the future. They can make it even worse than it is now. That's my concern.
You know, if we're honest with each other in this country, and we don't look through a political kaleidoscope, but we look through this idea that it is what it is. And if we reflect back to 1982, when I started police work in Southern California, we've been dealing with this problem years before I even got there. In the 60s, in the 70s. Let's just be honest as a nation. Okay. The last time our immigration system worked in this country was when you stepped off onto Ellis Island. Up until that point, okay, our immigration system, no matter what we call it, no matter who we vote for, no matter what we say, okay, to be honest with you, it doesn't count. Kayla Hamilton was not apolitical in any way, shape, or form. She was a 20-year-old autistic girl in her little trailer trying to come to comprehension of her life based upon her mental capacity as an autistic girl. And next thing you know it, there's some person taking her life from another country, period, who did not grow up watching cartoons at, Saturday morning, eating a bowl of cereal. I think in America, we are so selfish to think our opinion is much more important than Kayla Hamilton's death. I'm always shocked and surprised that we have these positions. We just need to wake up and smell the coffee and realize that, you know what, this is not going away. And by the way, it doesn't matter who gets elected in this next election. Unless our leaders of this country decide we are done with this and fix it, and it can be fixed, okay? Not for money, not for a power play, okay? Not for, NGOs who are making millions and billions of dollars off of Kayla Hamilton, off of Rachel Morin. And the list goes on, off that 12-year-old. I mean, think about this as Americans, as each of us. Okay? That little girl in Houston went to the store. Yeah, okay, granted, it was late in the evening and she was being a teenager and she ran out of the house. Got it. Okay. But I want to be in a time, live in a time. I want my 5 grandchildren to be in a time, if they are disobedient like that and they go to the store, that they don't end up murdered, strangled, essayed, and thrown under a bridge in a canal. And then everybody go, well, who did this? Oh, well, it's these guys that shouldn't have been here in the first place. Because everybody else in this country, you want to drive, you get a driver's license. You want to, go to the doctor, you pay insurance. You want to travel in this country, show your government ID that is authorized with a little star in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. This is a reality check here for all of us in this country. The reason I have Jeff on today, because this guy is probably one of the national experts in this country who know what he's talking about. He was on the ground He's in the trenches. And he was an Army Ranger. Go figure, right? He's not only talked the talk, but he's walked the walk. And he's telling us, folks, we better start being Americans. Forget our political aspirations. Just forget it for a little bit, please. Because people are dying. We're dying. Americans are dying. Both of my parents are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. My father fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And I remember him leaving in 1965 and walking into my bedroom and kissing me on the forehead. And he was dressed in his military utilities at that time, his greens. And he was out the door, and I didn't see him until a year later. And he did 5 tours in Vietnam, was in my childhood. And I watched my mother keep our family together because she too was in the Marine Corps and got out in 1953.
Chris, both my parents were in Vietnam. This is how my parents met. My father lost his hand, and my mom, she had completed her tour, and he came through her hospital when she was back in the States.
Yeah.
And I can remember to this day when I volunteered to go to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
My mom yelled at me, and I was like, "Mom, you went to Vietnam. Why are you yelling at me?" I went there so you wouldn't have to. And she goes, "And now I'm a parent. I know what I put my parents through. I didn't want you to have to do what I did." Right. So I mean,
and to hear you say that, Jeff.
She said this has nothing to do with politics. No,
massive respect to you.
Or Democrat. This isn't liberal, conservative. This is just, what do we need to do to protect our citizens in this country? And coming up, and as you're right, if you remember in our time, the big thing, the first time we tried to do something was in the 80s, right? Under Reagan and Bush.
Yeah, he opened the door of amnesty. I was on the streets.
Right. And it hasn't changed since.
No.
40 years later, we're still in the same boat we were 40 years ago.
And I'm going to show you one thing. Keep talking.
We as Americans, the one thing I always go back and say is, when you read our Constitution, one, we're a constitutional republic, and it says we the people. We need to hold our leaders accountable, and we haven't been doing that on either side. This is, Republicans are just as much at fault as Democrats for our border crisis right now. Everyone can't get together and sit down and communicate and come up with a plan to handle this.
This is a story. It was 1991. Okay. Look at the story they did. Okay. This was a murder of a captain or a lieutenant. His name was Dave Tabor. He was murdered in the El Chorrito restaurant. Okay. That's me. Right there. That guy. Okay. This is 1991. 1991. How many years ago was that, right? Okay. This guy was a lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps working as an assistant manager at an El Chorrito restaurant out in town, part-time, to supplement his college. He had a wife, kids, okay, 33 years ago. What's changed? 2 guys kill him, flee to Mexico, and we end up getting him. Here he is, one of them. Here's the other guy, Mauricio Ramirez. Okay. We chase him down in Mexico. Now, what does this have to do with anything other than Dave Tabor's life? The biggest problem here is it's still occurring. And Americans are just kind of like, well, yeah, okay, whatever, whatever. Okay. But when we see stuff like this with Kayla, and we see stuff like Rachel, okay, and we see stuff, and his wife's name is Jill, by the way, Jill Tabor. And he has a son now who is much older. He's probably 40 now. There was no reason that man should have lost his life. None. And back then, okay, it was like it made the local news, et cetera. And yet this problem has exasperated itself. We can all figure out, it's not rocket science, how to figure out how to control this problem. And then guess what? Immigration becomes legal immigration. It's simple. We're a country of laws. And if we lose that basic premise, then we're not a country. We're just, come on in. Anybody, if you're from MS-13, yeah, you're 118,000 of the, missing kids now. Well, there are 100,000 kids missing in the country right now, Jeff, right? If not more, that they're saying that the Department of Homeland Security has lost, track of them. They don't know where they're at.
Well,
and court dates are being set out to 2032 now for immigration hearings.
Chris, here's the thing. When those unaccompanied minors get here and then they're reunited with their sponsors, there's no more checks. There's nothing on there. And it's not like they fingerprint them and have fingerprints on, right? and so once they're here, they're released to the sponsors. Again.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Murdered, and the family doesn't even know that their kids were that the kids were murdered, because they just kind of leave and they lose track of them. The kids, the gang members go, as I said, they go out and hang out at their destroyer houses.
Well, and remember, you're the real deal. Again, you fought in Afghanistan for our freedom. Freedom is not free. Everything that you guys went through, everything you've seen, everything you've done, you come home, you join the FBI, and now you're taking down these guys.
Well, just for your information, when I went to Afghanistan, I went with the FBI, and I worked on the FBI's counter IED initiative. So I was in Kabul working to target the Taliban, Al-Qaeda bomb makers and suicide bombers. And I worked closely with 10 special forces groups. So, when a bombing occurred, we respond, we'd go out at 2:00 in the morning but the group I worked with was 10 special forces group. We'd go out 2 in the morning, hit a location, grab the bomb makers, and we would teach everyone how to do searches to find different material and evidence on the scene. So, it was a very unique time. But when I went, the team I was with, we responded to a terrorist attack. We rescued approximately 30 Americans who were being attacked. We captured one of the terrorists. The other one blew himself up because he had the bomb, right? And we did a lot of work with that. But it's very, very disheartening when you come back and then you see what happened when we withdrew, right? The lackadaisical response to the withdrawal, how quickly the Taliban took back over, and all the work we did. Because when I was there, I can't tell you how many sources we developed where, I can remember talking to this one Taliban guy who came to us. He was younger, and he said, I really believed that you Americans were to come here and change your way of life. And, I bought into what the Taliban were telling us. And the Americans, you're here building schools, making our bridges, keeping us safe, where the Taliban, they're growing poppy and heroin, and they're saying you can't do this stuff, but here they are doing it, selling it, and making money so that they can continuously attack not just the Americans, but the Afghan citizens themselves, right? So, and then we just leave them, and it's disheartening because you see that. To me, you can see some of that lackadaisical approach to here in our own country, right? And we can't do that. We're a country, and though we have our faults, show me a country that doesn't have faults, doesn't have something negative in their path. Every country does, and countries continue. We have bad people everywhere, right? No matter what. So I mean, we're always going to have faults, but over time, I look at what we've done as a country and say we're a great country, and we need to protect our citizens from the evils out there. And too many times we don't look and see the evil that's out there, and we're letting it in. And to me, when you look at our border crisis right now, because I believe it's a border crisis, that you're not going to convince me otherwise. It's not just the gang members crossing our border from El Salvador, from Venezuela, but we're in a Cold War with China. And look at how many military-aged Chinese crossed our border, men, right? And you look right now, China does everything they can to steal every secret we have, right? You look at U.S. Steel; they spend millions of dollars to develop steel, make it lighter, stronger. The Chinese steal it. Now they make it, and they didn't have to spend a single dollar to research this, to create this new process, and they're making all the money, and they're undercutting U.S. Steel. To me, this is a national security issue that we're not addressing, and it's not just at the national security level; it's at our level, because our citizens are not safe in areas where these gang members are coming in and wreaking havoc.
Well, and I think this Maryland thing should be a wake-up call for American citizens.
Well, I completely agree. And here's the thing, too, that I get so mad with our politicians about, because they play these games, right? In 2017, President Trump referred to MS-13 gang members as animals. And if you recall, the press, everyone else lambasted him. Oh, you're calling all these immigrants animals. No, he called MS-13 animals. And what I found very unique was the very next day, and you saw the tape. That tape showed a guy where he killed some kid just walking home from school, stabbed him, killed him. His street name was Animal. And he was sentenced to 35 years in prison the day after Trump called MS-13 gang members animal, right? And I just thought it was kind of ironic that, here he is saying this, he's getting beat up, but the very next day, Animal sentenced to 35 years in prison for killing someone.
I think it's important to bring our experience to the table. I love this platform because we're seeing, you and I see things because we've been there, done that, and we've seen it at 2 a.m, right? And that's what the public expected. The public expected us to be up, you chasing the marathon bomber with your teams, right? Those guys. Okay. Nobody thought that afternoon that 2, pressure bombs were going to go off at the Boston Marathon. And there you are within 4, during that whole period, you're chasing those guys. Okay? Literally chasing these guys. These are terrorists, people that wake up in the morning. And this is, I think, one of the things we're missing in our society and as American citizens today. The 4th of July was just the other day. I mean, it's the celebration of, how this country came together. But we forget the country came together because, there was a fight. And it was brutal. Okay? And many people lost their lives. Okay? But if we think about what's going on in this country today, last year there were 106,000 Americans that lost their lives through drug addiction, fentanyl poisoning, etc. When I started on the street, it was crack cocaine. Methamphetamine really wasn't a thing. It was speed. It was MDA, right?
PCP.
PCP, right? Everybody was dusting, as we used to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those were the drug problems. Those were the drug problems of this country. Okay. But if I say that number again, over 100,000 Americans, guess what? There's such apathy in this country to go, yeah. Because see, it's out of sight, out of mind. Okay. And people that are there, that are in the middle of it, okay, i.e. the PDs, the fire, doctors, emergency rooms, etc., the sheriffs, and the list goes on, the military, all the folks that see it go, hey, we got a problem. We have a real problem here. And you send it up the chain of command, and it just hits like this evaporation aspect. It just goes this way. Well, that guy is of that political persuasion, so I don't like that guy. And this guy's of that political persuasion, so I don't like that guy. And guess what? These guys aren't even talking. They can't even talk. And until you get a mother that goes to Congress and sits in front of the committees and says, hey, now think about that. If I went into a 7-Eleven tomorrow and I started yelling at the clerk that I wanted a soda out of the the cooler, and he's yelling at me, you don't deserve a soda. Okay? Well, no, I want a soda. Okay? No, you don't deserve a soda. Guess what? We can't even have a rational conversation anymore without this happening. And guess what? Our enemies see that.
They do see that. Chris, I remember.
Go ahead.
I remember back in the day when it was heroin. And then I remember when the fentanyl started coming into the heroin.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of it crosses the border from Mexico, but guess where it comes from? Guess where China. China makes fentanyl, sends it to either Canada or Mexico.
Remember the Golden Triangle?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What were we dealing with, right? Cocaine, heroin, right? That was it. That was the problem. And all of a sudden, a country got into the drug business. Now, and I think those of us in the chat, you're hearing it here. Okay? The reality of this is a country has joined hands with a cartel. Okay? And they are flooding. You can get fentanyl pills today on the street for 30 cents. And
I think it was either 2018 or 2019. No, it was probably 2018. I sat down in a meeting with Canadian Mounties, and they were talking about how the fentanyl comes into Canada. And Canada's drug rules are written different than U.S. drug rules, right? So here, when we talk about drugs, and we say heroin and any of its derivatives. So if you change it a little bit, it's still considered heroin no matter what. In Canada, they write it so, or they did back then. I don't know if they've changed it. I don't imagine that they have. But they used to write the law saying fentanyl in this makeup. So once the Chinese find out, oh, they made this version of fentanyl illegal, they just go in and tweak their formula and send it back over here because now it's no longer illegal. So it comes into the country, Canada, and here in the States, it's illegal to buy a pill press, but in Canada, you can buy a pill press. So you pay $18,000 for a kilo of fentanyl. You pay $6,000 for your pill press machine. You get some mix, and you start making fentanyl pills into the fake OxyContin with fentanyl, right? And you take and make with that kilo and mix 20 to 40 million fentanyl pills, and you've only spent maybe $20,000 total. And now you're selling each pill at 20 to 40 million pills, anywhere from 36 up. Think of the profits you've just made.
But it's insanity, and because if we think about police officers, right? When I was on the street, okay, and I retired in 07, so the fentanyl thing wasn't even a thing. I had no idea.
Mostly for you back then.
Yeah, it was black tar, right? It was black tar, meth, and PCP and crack, right? Rocks. Hey man, you want to buy a dime? Okay. I worked dope from 1984 to 1986. Okay, dope, vice, and narcotics. Okay, in fact, one other thing, Jeff. In my wall of shame behind me, this was my DEA narcotics school. So they sent me to the DEA school, and this was May 17th, 1985. You got yours there?
No, I don't have that. I have this from a heroin house that the drug dealer who was supplying all the gangs.
I love it.
Home invaded, and he bought this as his guard dog. And
oh my goodness!
Our search warrant. So I have my alligator saved. Send him to one of those alligator petting type zoos in North Carolina.
Yeah. So I was cross sworn. I went to the DEA Academy here back then. This was right around the time Kiki Camarena got killed on the other side of the border.
Yes.
Okay. And so, but we didn't have the problems that you guys, a couple of years later started going, what is this stuff? By then I was transferred into the Bureau. 1990, I got transferred into the Bureau and I stayed there pretty much. But where I was going with this is the officers now are carrying Narcan, and all these other drugs. And we've lost 100,000 Americans. Whether they have drug addiction problems, in my opinion, is irrelevant. The fact that they are in this country, we are the richest country in this world, where we have more resources, and we can't figure out how to help what's going on there. And it's not about throwing always money at a problem. It's about individuals. And that's where law enforcement has always been on the front lines within communities to say, come here, what's the problem? Okay, you're going into rehab. We have a hospital that's open over here. We're going to plug you in there. And that's how it was before we shut down all the mental health facilities in the late 80s. And President Reagan did that. He turned the switch off. Okay? And when that happened, then the jails became the medical facilities. And today, they can't keep up with it. They just can't keep up with it. So they kick them out. And the Chinese saw, and the nation, not Chinese people, the nation of China, saw the vulnerability of that, in my opinion, and said, you know what? Now's the time. Let's hit them. And if we wrap our mind around that for a moment, 100,000 Americans, approximately, and I don't have the exact numbers, but it's in that range. I guarantee it.
I thought it was more.
It may be. Maybe I'm being conservative. Thank goodness. Okay? But if it's more, if we look at the 10-year conflict of Vietnam, at war, we lost 58,000 troops in 10 years. We lost 100,000 Americans in 1 year. We multiply that 10 times. Where's the war? It certainly is in this country. And we can call it the war on drugs or whatever you want to call it. You know, that doesn't work. It's not a hard fix. It really isn't a hard fix.
Well,
We
Chris,
just need the will to do it. Go ahead.
you know, again, this is where I want to blame our politicians. I want to blame the media. Did you ever see the movie? I think it's called The Snitch, but it was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
I did.
Okay, so it's based on a true story where whoever the father is, his son gets arrested by the DEA, and the father kind of becomes an informant to try and work his son's beef off. But at the end of the movie, it flips up on the screen and says, you know, drug dealers spend more time in jail than murderers, armed robbers, and rapists do. And everyone wants to forget that drug laws came about from the crack wars in the 80s, right? If you remember, you were there, you were the violence associated with the gang selling drugs in the 80s was astronomical. And this is one of the things I teach with gangs, right? And this is all gangs, right? All gangs, they're about making money any way they can. And one way is selling illegal drugs. It's quick, it's easy, makes a lot of money quickly, right? You take an ounce of cocaine, you cook it into crack, you've got yourself 2 to 3 ounces of crack, and per hit, you know, a $10 bump of coke is going to get you high maybe once, right? But I can take that a little crack rock, which is a lot smaller than a bump of coke, and I can get like you high 4 or 5 times on that, right? And so you've got all this violence associated with the drug trade at that street level, right? Because if you're a blood and I'm a Crip and I steal one of your customers, you're coming after me because I've taken money out of your mouth. I've disrespected you, right? And so you go steal a car, and no one in our politics wants to say that stolen car is a violent crime. It's like no one's associated with that stolen car. Well, you may have stolen that car. I may have stolen that car, and now I do a drive-by. But because no bullets are found, or, you know, you hear the shots, maybe no one's hit, but because I'm in the car, maybe I used a revolver or something, there's no shell cases out. That crime never gets reported as a violent crime. But everything associated with that crime is violent, right? I've just shot at you all over the drug turf, all over controlling that drug turf for the money. It's all violent. And so you have laws that came in that set up mandatory minimum jail sentences for drugs. And the Black Caucus asked for those drug laws. But then in the 2000s, it came out to be like, oh, these drug laws are racist, so we're going to get rid of them because selling drugs isn't violent. That's the point. It's like, but no, we're targeting these violent gang members on drugs because no one will ever come and testify against a gang member who's done an armed robbery, who's done a rape, who's committed a murder. Why? Because I come in, you rob me. I'm a 7-Eleven owner. You rob me. I identify you to the police. You get locked up. But now, can the police stay in my business 24/7 to protect me from the rest of your gang? No. So do I ever show up? Do I actually press the charges to show up to a trial? Nope, you're back on the street. No one will ever testify against you. No one will testify if you don't want to. If I solve murder, I solved my first murder that I solved, and we in the gang world we did it slightly different because we had to. We had hundreds of witnesses, hundreds, who saw these 2 guys come up on a guy and shoot him 22 times. Not a single person identified. Law enforcement, we knew within 30 minutes who had done the shooting. We knew who it was, but we had no proof. I made a case against him using the drug laws, threw him in jail for 35 years. But while he was in prison, I got somebody to wear a tape against him in prison. And it's hard to smuggle in the recorder, keep most of the jail population, and I'm not talking the prisoners, keeping most of the guards because you don't know which guard you can trust, right? So only a few people knew that I've smuggled a wire into a prison, put it on someone, and got him to admit to the murder he did. And then we prosecuted him for the murder, right? That was the only way we could ever get him prosecuted, with hundreds of witnesses, because they shot him in front of the, where they you had these softball fields and you have these softball games going on during the summer. You had hundreds of people there to watch the games, and they all saw the shooting, and not a single person would identify him. Why? Because they're deathly afraid of the gang. So we use the drug laws to go after gang members, and you saw this huge decrease of violent crime. And now, because we've gone back the other way and we said, hey, we think all these crimes are bad, we shouldn't put people in jail for selling drugs. Now we see a violent crime across the nation going back up because no one's going to jail anymore. And at some point it'll change. They'll go back and they'll start using and making laws again to put people back in. But we've seen it. And this is, it's a shame that we keep having to relearn the lessons, right? That we learn our lessons, crime decreases. Oh, it's a shame we put people in jail. And if we can teach people not to go to jail, I'm fine. But to see the violent crime and who is the victims the most? The majority of our victims are the kids who can't go out and play in the playground after school. The kids who get shot walking home. The mom who looks out the window because her young daughter says, I hear something going on the streets, opens up the window and takes a bullet between her eyes. Those are our victims, and we're not protecting them. That's what's such a shame now, because this is, if you look, this is everything that we're talking about here with our border, but it's everything across the country with crime as a whole. It's a shame, because I get asked today, hey, would you recommend a career in law enforcement? And I don't know. I have a hard time telling people to go into law enforcement today. I really do.
Right.
Because we're no longer appreciated. And the few bad apples out there make a bad name and make it worse for the good people out there trying to do the right thing of protecting their community, right? I get asked all the time, oh, is it great when you go out and you lock up 60 people in a day? Yes. Don't get me wrong. It was a great morning. You wake up. Well, I would never sleep the night before a big raid, right? But in my case, I'm getting ready. I've got 60 teams of 10 law enforcement officers plus SWAT teams going out, hitting 60 doors at once, being on the radio, execute. They all go out. That's a great day. But you know what's better? When you see a city that had 60 gang-related shootings, a small city. I'm not talking like Boston itself, but a smaller suburb of, but still an inner city outside of Boston. 60-some gang-related shootings over 6 months. You arrest 60 people, and you see 2 gang-related shootings for the next year. Because to me, you're looking at the community saying, we've done something so kids can go play in the basketball courts. Kids can go play on the softball, baseball fields. The grandma can send grandson out to go buy a gallon of milk and not be worried of having that kid shot during a drive-by shooting. That brought me more pleasure than anything, because you knew at the end of the day that we're taking care of that community. And people don't see that anymore, right? And that's why I have a hard time telling people, is this really what you want to do? I don't know, because, it's such a shame when you've got things that are going on and such, and being in fear of just not being respected. But I can tell you, it's very, I've had gang moms, gang girlfriends hug me, because at the end of the day, whether or not, I always wanted to lock up my gang members, right? But if one of them was shot and killed, my job is to bring them justice as well, right?
Right.
A murder took place. And when you solve that murder and you solve a gang, having a gang mom or a gang girlfriend or something give you a hug because you brought justice to their sibling or their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their son, it's a big deal. Because again, typically You'd show up at the house, knock on the door. You've been there, and you get shit on by mom and dad. Why are you bothering my son? Because he's a gang member breaking the laws. Like, I mean, but it's a big thing. But it's tough, I think, now looking at the way we look at our laws and what it is for our law enforcement officers. Because you and I being retired, it's different today than it was when we were in.
Yeah, I know. It's I mean, I see it every single turn, And what's sad is I want to read this real fast. So this is Kayla's mom, and this is what she said. Let's see here. I want to answer this question. Can you please explain how to find and participate in reporting illegal? The act you describe in the panel about Rachel's murder. The easiest way is if you see something, say something. Pick up the phone, call your local authorities, and say, look, this is what I saw. This is what I think. It may not be anything. And hopefully the agency listens to you. I think agencies are kind of paying much more attention. But this letter here is actually heartbreaking. It was read to the Committee on Homeland Security in January of this year by Kayla's mother. And she read it. She said, "Good morning. Thank you for having me here today." And by the way, everybody, this is the state of the problem. This is the problem. This is a heartfelt mother who lost a child through violent crime. And those of you in my chat who have ever lost a child, okay, know what that depth of pain is about. Okay? It's unimaginable. And she writes, "Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Tammy Nobles. I am the mother of Kayla Hamilton. July 24th, 2002 was one of the best days of my life. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and her name was Kayla Marie. She loved to smile and laugh. She always kept her friends close and never forgot anyone. She was kind, caring, thoughtful, and funny. She loved life and God. She showed the world that being yourself was okay and you didn't have to follow everyone. But sadly, on July 27, 2022, I received the worst news that a parent doesn't want to hear, that my newly 20-year-old daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was murdered in her own room and left on the floor like trash. The illegal MS-13 known gang member brutally raped and murdered my daughter by strangling her with a cord and robbed her of $6. During the attack, Kayla called her boyfriend for help, but it went to voicemail. The voicemail of the murderer strangling Kayla was 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. DHS employees failed to visually inspect the assailant by lifting his shirt to check for gang-related tattoos. Had DHS employees performed a visual inspection of the assailant's body, they would have seen MS-13 gang-related tattoos on his body, disqualifying him from entering the U.S. DHS employees failed to make a simple phone call to the El Salvadorian government to verify if assailant was on the MS-13 gang affiliation list. Had they done so, the El Salvadorian government officials would have confirmed the assailant was a known MS-13 gang member with a prior criminal history. DHS supervisors failed to train and supervise DHS employees to properly screen minors attempting to enter U.S. soil from El Salvador. The operation The operational neglect committed by DHS carried over into DHHS, whose operational neglect further sealed my daughter's fate. DHSS operational neglect included its employees violating clearly articulated protocol requiring a minor to be placed with a verified relative before entering the U.S. DHSS employees neglected and recklessly failed to verify a legitimate family member of the assailant or sponsor before allowing him to enter U.S. soil. There were clear inconsistencies in the DHS and DHSS records regarding the identity of the relative to whom the assailant was released. Ultimately, DHSS farriers allowed the MS-13 gang member as a minor to rent a room in a trailer park from another individual who was also an illegal immigrant. There was a lack of transparency by DHS and DHSS, including when unlimited to DHSS farriers provided House of Representative Chairman Jim Jordan a copy of its audit report. Now, remember, this was read to the committee, and he chairs just that committee. So this is not a political, shot at anybody. This is just the committee that she read this letter to. Let's take a moment and think about how Kayla felt that day. Mom brings it right back. She took it out of politics. And anybody that's thinking politics at this point, you're part of the problem. You really are. That's just my opinion. How scared she must have been the day knowing that she was dying. And if she was going to see her mommy again, her baby sister, her brother, or her cat, Oreo. Kayla fought for her life that day with all that she had, and in the end, she lost to an individual who wasn't even supposed to be allowed into this country. Imagine that, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. This mother has this voicemail. Imagine listening to that voicemail as an American, listening to this American be strangled. Let that sink in. This was an American citizen, a child. I think every American politician should listen to that 2 minutes and 30 seconds and hear the horror in that child being murdered. Let that sink in. If you couldn't watch that part in Saving Private Ryan, where the German soldier was they were hand-to-hand combat, it's the same impact, in my opinion. For me, this is not political, she says. It's an issue. This is safety. It's a safety issue for everyone living in the United States. This could have been anyone's daughter. I don't want any other parent to live this nightmare that I am living. I am her voice now, and I'm going to fight for everything I have to get her story told and bring awareness of the issues at this border. If we had stricter border policies, my daughter would still be alive today. Nothing will bring my daughter back, nor fix the pain of not having her here. But I want to prevent this from happening to somebody else's child. This isn't about immigration. This is about protecting everyone in the United States. I echo that letter going back to 1991. Dave Tabor, a lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps, working a part-time job, loses his life as a result of the same problem that has not been fixed in 33 years. And Dave is just one of many cases that both Jeff and I have worked over the years. It's time that we change things in the United States of America. And the first thing we need to change is stop blaming each other because of political differences. We need to get back to talking to one another, finding solutions, compromising on those solutions, and a solution that works for legal immigration for both immigrants coming into this country, because we need immigrants. And it's a great country built on immigrants. And we have to, though, get to this place where we can talk first. Until we can talk, there are going to be many more Rachel Morins, many more Rileys in Georgia, many more. This young lady, I forget her name off the top of my head, and her parents, please forgive me. But the young lady in Houston who was murdered by the two guys from Venezuela. And the list will go on. And by the way, it's just not these Latin American countries. This is a huge problem in this country with this being open, this border being open, with over 100,000 Americans dying in this country. When are we going to say we're done with this? Enough is enough. When do we say that? When do we look at our grandchildren and say, you know what? I'm going to give you the future that I had. I'm going to let you play out at night. And when the lights come on, you come home. When do we get back to that principle? It starts by treating each other with dignity and respect and having real conversations like this and not criticizing us, each other, and blaming other people. It starts by us taking individual accountability for our individual circumstance and area of influence. It begins with each of us. And we can move mountains if we do that as a country. There's nothing that can stop us. If we think about 1941, when our country was attacked on December 7th, 1941, within 2 to 3 weeks, we had over 2 million Americans join the military within 2 or 3 weeks. When our country was attacked in New York City, guys like this over here, Jeff, they stepped up to the plate and they protected our freedoms to have these conversations. But freedom has no value unless we're able to talk to one another. And it starts by holding those in individual offices within our communities, within our boards, school boards, within our the counties, and then our congressional folks and our Senate folks, not only within our states, but within our Washington, D.C., those that we send there. They have to remember we are their voice of reason. And we expect them to communicate with each other and talk and fix it, compromise. It's often been said that God does not hear our words, but he hears our hearts. If we unite our hearts as a nation, God will hear and he will move those that need to be moved into the appropriate places they need to be. I know that to be a true principle. I've seen it in my own individual life. And we need to see less of this that we're talking about tonight and more about, did you have a good 4th of July with your family? And did you have a good time? Because we also have thousands and tens of thousands of veterans in this country who fought for our freedoms. And they are also caught up because we haven't been able to talk and figure out solutions. And it's not rocket science. I lived through the 60s, the 70s, 80s. I'm still here today, and hopefully the Lord gives me the breath of life tomorrow. Okay? But if he doesn't, I've said my piece. And hopefully you can influence that person next to you, and like a fire, we light this country in a very positive way, a fire of hope, a fire of inspiration. And we move this country back to its fundamental basics. That's treating each other with respect, obeying the laws of this country, respecting the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and all of the things that this country is built on. And we get back to basics. We don't worry about what that guy's doing or what that guy's doing, what that guy's doing. We worry about, is that guy okay? Can I help? Is that guy different than me? Yeah. Okay. What's up? How are you? The one thing about law enforcement, and Jeff knows more than anybody, the one thing about law enforcement is our job was to stand in between these two people fighting each other. And they'd yell at us on this side, and we'd turn and go, Roger that. And they'd yell at you on this side, and you go, hey, I like your shirt, okay? And we'd go home, and everybody would go home. We'd high five each other, right, Jeff? And everybody went home for the evening. And guess what? Freedom, the First Amendment was honored and kept up. We can do this together. We can do this. Okay, Jeff, you get the final word, and thank you for your service, not only in the FBI, but as in the Army, and thank you so much for educating us about these guys. And I want to have you on again. Will you come back again?
Oh, yes.
As always. And I know, tell everybody about your specials. And you need to write a book. Have you thought about writing a book yet?
I have. I just haven't had. I need help. Report writing, I'm great at. Making it going to a book is a little different than, all right, this is what happened on this drug buyer. This is what happened during my interview, right? It's a whole different type of writing. And I'm not the, what's the word you say? The descriptive, the artistic part, that's what I lack to make it smooth flowing, a good read. But
there's enough people out there, enough ghostwriters out there that can help you.
Well, finding a ghostwriter is what I need.
Okay, I can help you there, and we'll talk offline.
Okay, but yeah, I've had so many people who all said you need to write a book, because I was blessed. I can tell you that the group of local, state law enforcement officers that I worked with for 20 years, we became a core group. The trooper I worked, we were together for 20 years. I always get messed with back in the FBI office. You're an FBI agent. You're closer to the trooper, and the trooper would always get told by the troopers, you're a trooper. You're not an FBI agent. You're closer to the FBI guy, right? But we were both young when we came into the gang unit, and in Boston, because of Whitey Bulger and John Connolly, there was not a lot of trust between local stateies and the FBI, and he put that aside and said, hey, you're new, we'll work together. And in 20 years, we went after all these gangs and made great cases. And the people we brought and worked together, just the professionalism, the ability for us to work together and put aside the I'm FBI, I'm state police, I'm whatever police part, and just come together and say, hey, we're a team. And as that team, we were so much stronger than just one agency working together. And the work we did was phenomenal. I mean, we really went after these gangs and went after them hard. And it really, we did some great work. And it would not have happened without us working as a team. Kind of everything, as you said before, now and then, as you said, like, we'd still get in there and be like, we'd have a few good arguments. But again, we get done our argument and go out that night and have a beer because we're like, okay, we can disagree on something. But at the end of the day, we're here to work together, and we can put aside those little stupid differences that you have every now and then. Because when you put 10 alpha males together or any alphas together, you're going to have some issues. But we made it work for 20 some years. I mean, it was phenomenal, and I really loved it. And knowing what we did to help the community out, seeing, we had after this case, we had an emergency room doctor, pediatrician emergency room doctor say, hey, I have not seen the kids coming in my ER with the anxiety, the stress, the knife wounds since this takedown. It's been such a blessing. So I know we as a group of people just thrown together to work together did a great job, and it was phenomenal. And just to echo, if we can do it there, we can do it again for this country and get us back on track. But it's going to have to take work, and it's going to have to us holding our leaders accountable, because as the Constitution says, we the people, we need to take ownership of our government again and say, hey, you got to start doing the right thing, or we get you out of office, right? That's what we need to do. And it's been a blessing. I mean, 30 plus years of federal government service. It was great. I loved every second of it. I wouldn't change it for the world. I really wouldn't. It was knowing that I was here to help protect our country, protect our communities. I loved every second of it.
You're a great American, brother. Thank you for being here tonight. And thank you, everybody in the chat. Please share these positive messages, hopefully, around your social networks. And I can't wait to see your specials coming up on the Discovery Channel. I need to get your autograph while I got a chance, brother. All right, let's go to Hawaii. You ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.